This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Today's guest is a MarTech and sales tech revolutionary with a knack for generating demand and creating sales and marketing infrastructure. He advises financial institutions and banks on sales and marketing trends across over 60 technologies. He is also a business strategist who has helped transform the sales and marketing strategies of over 200 small and large businesses. Please welcome founder and CEO of Measured Results Marketing, Christopher Antonopoulos. Hey, Christopher.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me on today. I'm quite excited about the opportunity to chat about data and decisions.
Yeah, I am as well. So one of the first things that I want to do is give you the same question that we ask everybody. I know that there's a lot of kind of directions to take this in, but I'm excited to hear what you think about it. So what is the one thing you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
I wish they knew that you didn't have to keep all of the data that you collect over time, and that they understood where it actually came from. I think data is something that people hold on to, like things we have in our storage unit that have been there for years that we haven't used nor ever plan to use. But I think only keeping the things that are going to allow you to make decisions and not feeling like you have to keep everything, and then making sure you understand where it came from in the first place. Who entered it? Was it uploaded through a list? Is it accurate or not? Or I would say those are probably you asked for one thing, but I think those are the two things that are particularly important.
Yeah. As a result of my role, I was kind of a gatekeeper of data. I was one of those people that people would come to and be like, hey, I need this, or I need the answer to a question. One of the things that I had found was, there's kind of this, I'd like to call it old school, but it's not old school. It still rides. There's this there's the business and there's IT, or there's some sort of it's like this profit kind of cost center mentality. And in order to handle the volume of requests, there would always be tickets and prioritizations. And I get where that comes from, right? A lot of times these people only get one bite at the apple, and to get another data request takes all this time. But you're absolutely right. We would give them these data sets and it would be okay, well, we need every column you have from all of history. And I'm like, you sure? That might crash your machine.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, even Excel has limits, the number of rows you have or data you can look at. Yeah, it's really interesting because it's sort of, for me, it's sort of that fallacy is that, if you have all the data, then you can find the answer to that question. And the more data you have, the better chances you are of answering that really obscure question. Tell me what the change is in annual recurring revenue over the last 5 years, and were there any changes in trend in what the business was selling, right? That's a fairly common question, at least in our world, or, what's the average monthly recurring revenue? And so what happens is that you then spend all of your time trying to figure out what data is real and what field to look in. And you don't really get to answer the global question, which is, are we trending to make more money? And is there any changes in terms of what people are spending with us to sort of answer that question? Mm-hmm. So, I think that with data, believe it or not, less usually is more, but it's trying to understand the business, what the company is trying to figure out or solve for, rather than the question they're asking you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's the other piece. So if it's great, you're trying to do analysis and you're looking at there are 500 different fields. One of our clients has 19 different databases that collect different information. What field do you use from what database? And then what are duplicated? And then, what fields is there only a 1% chance that you would actually need that data is the thing to figure out.
Yeah. I think particularly, I'm an unapologetic nerd and a data nerd and, tech and computer science and all that stuff. I just, I think it's awesome. I love it. And I think for people like me, there's, like I hear the problem that you described there and I'm like, oh, we just have to build like the data warehouse for the next gen, like amazing,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, okay, well, you kind of touched on it, right? Like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, in my experience, as sad as this is to say, the majority of these like integration, warehousing, like we're going to make all the data super easy and manageable initiatives, they die. And before they die, they cost a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I have always tried to preach something which is very similar to what you talk about, which is kind of like, what's the 20% of information that's going to get you 80% of the answers? And what is the easiest step to get you towards that? And take that, right? And if you get results from that and it's positive and you want to invest a little bit more, then invest a little bit more. Like maybe eventually, right? If you have enough money and success and all these things, like maybe you get to a place where you have a good data warehouse. I've seen some of them. But like the idea that we're just gonna like have all this discombobulated stuff all over and we're gonna have one initiative and then it's gonna be, utopia on the far end, like it's just a pipe dream in my experience.
Well, the other part too is sort of what are the things that the business needs for fundamentals to understand? And I think it sort of never starts that way, at least in my experience. It's not the great. To run an efficient business, we need to understand the following things: who we sell to, how much we sell to them, is that trending or any changes over time, are there changes in demographic or firmographic data associated with those people. And so there's only like 8 or 10 things that you really need to know to make sure that things are going in the right direction, or we call them oh crap moments, that you're identifying something that's not working the way you're expecting to quickly and you can solve it. But, all of those other pieces, I think that as a fellow scientist, I studied physics and quantum mechanics, then, you never knew what variable was the one that was going to make a difference. And so you wanted to keep all of it. But, do you really need to store every click, every visit to the website, every email open, every click for the last number of years? And I think it's sort of, I don't know. I guess there's some comfort in keeping that.
Yeah.
Because you never know, you may have a question, but at the same time, the incremental time it takes you to get an answer to someone's question because you're sorting through that data or even distracted by things that don't make it may not have a logical correlation to something, but you want to just look at it because you have it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that this makes me think about is you talked about like, okay, well, when we look at it, like, why are we doing this? And you talked about kind of these fundamental ideas, right? Like, how do we understand where we're at as a business and kind of do this monitoring? And I probably just from spending too much time thinking about it and trying to abstract something that's very simple, but like I view it as, you have a company or an NGO or a charity or whatever it is, some organization that's trying to get someplace. They are trying to do something. They have goals.
Yep.
And then in the pursuit of those goals, we have to make decisions around how are we going to attack X, Y, or Z? How are we going to plan for this? Should we stockpile cash? Should we spend? Should we, like, whatever it is, you have this series of decisions that you get to make. And then based on those decisions, you take some actions and hopefully you achieve the goal that you wanted to. So, we have goals, decision, action, progress. And when I think about it, there's this idea, I think, that if we just have all of this information all the time, that somehow magically, not only will the right decisions get made, but the actions following those decisions will happen flawlessly. But it's like, it's these like really fundamental, like really, really big questions that have really high cost to changing. These are the ones where it makes sense. Like, hey, like let's invest in collecting this data and digging in. Most of the decisions that I find that I make and that other people make in business
No.
are kind of these two-way decisions where it's like, it's really good to just like you said, like have a pulse of what's going on. Can I see that accurately across most of my business and across a reasonable amount of time? And then make a call and focus more on like, we made what we
Yeah.
think is the right decision. Let's follow this through with action now.
I mean, the other piece of this is that you have to look beyond the data and understand what's going on in the world around you when you talk about that. So I sometimes find it funny to look at some of the data. And so if you go back far enough, economic conditions are different in those pieces. And so,
Mm,
it's not only the data, but do you really think that what happened in the past or those trends are going to happen in the future based on all of those other components? It could be management team, it could be economy, it could be pre-AI and current AI or those bits. And so that's
mm,
the thing that I find surprising is that in a lot of this analysis is that people think that what happened in the past is the indicator of what's going to happen in the future. And when they see some sort of change in that data or some of those key metrics, it's sort of like okay, we are down 5% in this metric, but we're up 10% in this other one. And so we need to optimize for this one because we're not going to get back to that condition that produced those results a year ago, 2 years ago, or 3 years. So I think the looking back is important for some of the trends or, understanding, but ultimately it's tied to that goal, right? So if your goal is X revenue and you're selling less of one product, and maybe you look at the environment and say, there's not a market for that anymore. And so we need to sell more of this other thing instead of saying, oh my gosh, what is wrong here? We're
yeah.
down 5%. We need to fix this. Then, what happened or what changed? Let's spend some more marketing dollars or let's reduce pricing to try to get more volume. And that's the fallacy I see with also keeping some of this old data that's not really an indicator of what's going to happen in the future. That's what we're trying to predict, right? Did we do something wrong? Did we make a bad decision based on information that we had available to us at the time? Like why is our forecast not right?
Mm,
And I'm sure you spend lots of time on that as well. Well, we forecasted to grow at X%, and based on the data we have available, we thought this was going to happen, and ultimately it didn't. Why did we miss it, and how can we prevent that from happening again?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that this gets me thinking about, so we're talking about kind of the idea of, well, focus on what's important. Try to find, the signal versus the noise, if I can steal Nate Silver's book title. But I think that, one of the things that is particularly common in your space, right? The sales and marketing tech space is this idea of like, all right, there's lots of external data that's out there.
Mhm.
And, for example, like whether people are aware of this or not, like lots of the data that we choose or kind of blindly hand out to tech companies, right? It gets aggregated and it gets moved around and
Yeah.
packaged and cleaned up, and then it can get sold to people. So people can go out, like I could buy a database full of people that I think might be good candidates to buy my products. And then I load them in and I send them all an email, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe I decide to call them all or whatever the case may be. So when we talk about this idea of like figuring out what is the right data, how do you balance and blend that with recommendations for using like aggregating third party data, enriching first party data with it? How do you kind of balance that?
I mean, I think we look at it from a relationship perspective first. And so I think
Mm,
from a data perspective, we're far more interested in cleaning up data we already have for someone who is in the sales process, purchase services,
mm,
purchase software for us first. I think that's from a prioritization perspective, because they know you or have some level of connection. And so reconnecting with them, understanding those bits is important from a prioritization perspective. Then it comes down to sort of groups and communities. So
mm.
we're both, members of lots of groups on LinkedIn, and have done, podcasts in different places in that example. So the next level for us is, what is sort of that second level connection or things you have in common with a group that you can then be able to understand the specific challenge that someone has, or be able to relate or to be able to help them. And then the third one is, I think it's interesting you talk about the aggregated courses. Ironically, if you sort of do some digging, a lot of them aggregate from the same sources. So it's sort of funny, like you're buying a list. We work with lots of different data vendors and
Mm-hmm.
companies that do that type of work. And you realize that they use 5 or 6 of the same sources, and then they have some special sauce that they have, either human validation or adding information about what technology someone has on top of that list. But I think beyond that, it's just your ideal customer profile. And then you have to experiment with lists from those sources to see, is this a new prospect? I don't know anything about them, but are they close enough from a industry, type of business, size, or kind of the key criteria that we can help them based on people we've serviced or have a track record of helping in the past. So
Yeah.
I think it's those levels, which is, we've worked with them, we know them, they're part of a group or community that we're part of. Then, is this the type of company that we can help? And then start experimenting with the data and some of those companies to see if they really meet that or not.
Yeah. I I loved where you started there. Essentially, how it's mostly about people and about relationships. I think there was, if we think about the, progression of how sales and marketing worked, right? Like, I think a lot of kind of like the old school, right? Okay, briefcase, go to the trade show, hand out cards, handshake, talk to people, get a phone number, call them, follow them up, kind of do, this in person, try to craft relationship type deal. And as, technology very rapidly influenced like every part of everything in the world,
Yeah.
we've seen how, there was this kind of push to just cast this like unbelievably wide net because technology allowed it. And then just like, well, we're going to, even if we get, excuse me, like a 1/4% hit rate,
Mhm.
if we just put enough names through it, we can still beat it, how many sales reps we can have out on the road. So obviously, I think the pendulum is swinging the other way now. Like, every human is tired of the constant like email, text, and call spam. We have like do not call lists, and there's all sorts of regulations
Yeah.
now around data and the way that you can do things. And one of the things that I like, that I see you talk about is this idea of, hey, we're going to focus on the personal relationships with people, and we're going to use technology to empower that process. But the underlying process is ultimately trying to have a conversation with a human being about something that's in their best interest and that
Yeah.
they can trust you to deliver.
I mean, you look at there's a whole bunch of stats around, now a lot of the sales are based on relationship and network and all of those bits for validation. And so you need to make sure you have that available to someone in the sales process or in the evaluation process. So it is shifting back to that in terms
Mm,
of, essentially, I think the way that we're looking at it now is that, you know, you I'm sure everyone has read, between 67 and 72% of the buying process happens before they actually call the company or, try to engage with you, depending on what report you look at or read. But I think now the shift is, companies prepare by, talking to people they know that have a software solution or bought something. I think the shift now is that the company who is selling is responsible for having that same amount of information about that person they're engaging with.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. And it's a huge shift. So before I get on a call, it's interesting. I sometimes play the role of sales engineer. I don't think I will ever get out of that. I love it too much, but
Yeah.
it's interesting the amount of information, and work that's done on that side prior to the conversation from the company. And I think that's been a huge shift here.
Yeah.
So I need to know how the company is doing and who the key players are in the organization, and then the individuals on the phone, what are their roles, what communities are they part of, have they participated in an event or podcast or, written anything. And so you have to sort of know that person and know what their interests are in those pieces to give you that chance to build that relationship, because that's sort of that old saying of you never have a second chance to make a first impression. And so there's more pressure on that from a human perspective, but also from a data perspective.
Yeah.
I'm still getting those awful emails. I see that you went to Boston University.
Yeah.
I know someone that went there, right? I didn't go there myself, but I saw something in your profile that shows that. And it's really easy now with tools to discount those type of messages.
Yeah.
So I think that's the shift. We internally call that digital detective, right? And so that's what we need to do in order to find out all of this information before that interaction, because, people are also very impatient now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I'll speak for myself only here, but like kind of tired of spam.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I own my own business and we do data consulting. That's why I love talking about this stuff. And, I obviously engage in my own marketing activities, trying to show people, what types of stuff we're useful at helping with. And man, like, it's like, some of the stuff I'm like, well, would I want someone to do that to me? Like, would I want to get that email? It's like, nah, then I'm not going to send it. But like what you're talking about there, like that was kind of like a mind blow there. Like you're absolutely right. Like people have investigated you and they have at least a reasonable idea that they could trust you and get what they want from you. Otherwise, they wouldn't have initiated a conversation with you. Like
Yeah.
no one's going to waste their time on that. So I love kind of like flipping that back on yourself and being like, well, if they've done the work on you to know you that well to decide that they want to talk to you, why don't we do the same? When I think about that, I think about like, well, hey, that's exactly how I want to show up. Like if I showed up to a call trying to buy something and someone was like, hey, I saw that you talked about this, this, and this. That plays into, our strengths here, here, and here. Like we think we're a great match for you. I would be like, oh my gosh.
I worked with Leslie, who is, you know, we worked with Leslie in a similar organization. Oh yeah, I know Leslie. We talked about XYZ, and
Yeah,
and none of that is accidental, right? I
exactly.
mean, I think it's sort of
It's a
it.
sign of respect.
Yeah, I think that's the right. I think respect, and the other word I would use is sincerity,
Mm,
right? So when I get a AI generated message that has, you know, attributes from my LinkedIn profile, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna make up some fake stuff in profile and like see if it comes out in like prospecting messages that I get sent. Might be fun to like game that a bit. But I think it's sincerity as well. Like some of these tools pull this information, and um it was funny. I recently reconnected with Andre Yee. So I used to, in the early Eloqua days, he sort of ran product over there. And there was at a conference and I was asking questions like, yeah, I know that it's a spam email. If someone starts by complimenting me on something, you have a great business. I'm really impressed by the results of the organization. So you said, Christopher, so if I ever want to get your attention, I just have to say you suck. Right. And I think that is sort of the crux of all of these pieces, which is, it's a sign of respect, but you also have to be sincere in those conversations as well. And so, if you look at some of that data, and we get back to sort of, well, what data do you actually need to keep then? Right. So you need to keep information that lets you know what your relationship is with that customer, with that prospect. Did they buy something with you? Did they engage? Did they have a good experience in using your services or product, or did they have a bad experience? Is there a new person in that organization? Has there been a seat change? Have people moved around? Like what's the status of your relationship with a person? And what's the status of the relationship with a company?
Yeah.
Right. And then for prospects, what progresses that relationship? I need a better than a dating analogy that's just used and overused, but it still makes sense. Which is like, how do you know you're making progress and being able to work together in whatever capacity that is? An email open really doesn't tell you that.
Yeah.
Right. And so what information tells you that you're progressing in that relationship? More people from the company coming, engaging in a certain type of content, seeing that person live. And so if you think about it that way, a lot of the data that's collected doesn't really show progress in that relationship.
Fair.
Right. If you get to attribution, it's sort of, that's what it comes down to. Like what thing got someone over the hump to say they want to do business with you? Was it really opening up an email or downloading a white paper, or, they talk about I think the magic number is like 10 or 18 different touches. And I don't know who figured that out or how. But I think it's marketing agencies that want to sell more services, honestly.
Fair guess, yeah.
And so tell you what, we're going to send emails, we're going to connect to people on social profiles. I'm part joking and I'm part serious. I know lots of people have spent lots of time figuring out what it takes to engage, but unless you are a Cisco Systems or IBM or Microsoft or Amazon, where you have huge business intelligence teams and you've got really high volume, sort of trying to figure out, I've done 12 touches and I need to get to 16 before we buy is a bit of a fool's errand.
Yeah.
So why keep all of that stuff that's going to make it harder for you to figure out very simple questions?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think most people are going to be better suited just like looking at that list and saying, like, how can I personally connect with a human today?
Yeah. I want a new metric. So, we talk about velocity of pipeline a lot.
Yeah.
Like, from the time a lead is created to the time it's sold, and, how long does it take to get to a meeting? How long does it take to have a proposal, negotiate, review, and buy? I want a velocity of relationship metric. I want a metric to show how do you progress in building a relationship to get to those points.
Well, this goes back to the point of what is easiest to measure is what gets managed most frequently. And so something as intangible as saying like, hey, I'm going to go out and try to build relationships with people and be like, okay, well, what's the best way to measure that? Oh, well, how many phone calls, right? Like, I got to tell you, right? Like if my buddies called me 10 times a day, they wouldn't be my buddies very long, you know? So like, no, phone calls isn't exactly the right metric, right? Like that's a hard thing to quantify, isn't it?
It is, but I think you can actually measure the progress toward that goal based on engagements or the touch points that you can measure.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got a random person, and then they subscribe to your newsletter. Then they download a piece of content, right? These are very easy metrics that everyone tracks, or they click on an ad or they visit your website. So I think you can look at the velocity and type of activities for engagement and then see how that changes over time. Like I'm actually most fascinated about these individuals who we don't know, who are consistently opening and clicking on content. The best we can tell, it's not a bot doing it, but sort of, understanding the behavior and getting to meet those people who are obviously interested in things that we're saying.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's like consistency. If someone really cares, they're going to be consistent.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I think that one of the things that, to bring it a little bit full circle, that you started off by talking about is really this concept of, lineage, right? So like, where do all of these pieces of data come from, and how can you track them through the systems to use them most effectively? And, now what we're kind of getting to at the end is it's like, there are ways to horrifically misuse these systems and these data. And, just kind of focusing on the wrong things, but like making them very quantified doesn't really imply that you're going to be successful. So what I think, I'm hearing from you, if I combine those two ideas, is really like, if we focus on the business goals and on crafting real relationships with people, as we talk about kind of marketing and sales tech, and we find ways to measure that, to report on that, like, how are we making real relationships? How can we show tangibly that people care, that people are like more engaged, improving engagement with the things that actually matter, right? Like the relationship that they have with the brand or with, the person that they're working with. That's probably a great way to think about those systems. And if we focus on that stuff and we don't worry about a lot of the other noise that's out there, we can probably outperform. Do you think I'm getting that right?
I think so. I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, you talk about the 80-20 rule or those pieces, and it's kind of the, if a 0.5% in a conversion rate makes a big deal to your organization, then yes, maybe, you need to think about that or those pieces, but that doesn't make an incremental business difference to 90% of the business that's out there to be that granular, but it's right. And I think the other part of it is everyone's excited about AI and analyzing data and asking questions and all those pieces. And I think if they have incremental data, these tools are going to help them sort it out. But in my mind, that increases your chance of having false positives by having all sorts of information that may or may not be relevant.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make things better. But as you started, people spent all sorts of money building this data warehouse and putting all of that stuff in there. And they realized that it cost them more money. And then now they're transporting data from one system to another using an API. Every single connection costs them more money. And then they have to better processors or, get more cloud storage to sort all this out. And so you're just incrementally building something, just like me taking stuff out to the storage unit that, yes, I like and I think I need, but it's been collecting dust for 3 years. And so why do I have it in there?
Yeah.
Am I going to use those Fisher Vacuum 210 skis?
Yeah.
Right? No. For the off chance, am I really going to pack that up? Get a special case to like send them to Colorado for that 1 or 2 days potentially during a year, every other year where the conditions are ideal for using them? Absolutely not. But I think that's the analogy I would use for data. Like, just think about that. I don't need that stuff. It's taking up space in my mind and in
Yeah.
my, not only the data warehouse, but in my mind. Why am I thinking about that thing? Just get rid of it and you'll be a lot more uncluttered and clear about what you need and then how to find it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think storage these days is cheap. It actually depends. Like, as we talk about a lot of like CRM, sales and marketing platforms, they actually are kind of charging by the row right now because they know
They're
it's
starting, yeah.
yeah, it's
They
kind of
want to
a
charge for
throughput game.
contact and they also want to charge for users and
Yeah.
then they want to charge for data. Like they all have different models for that now.
Yeah. So I definitely get you. You gotta be careful and you gotta balance it, right? Like focus on, like we started talking about, like what are the goals? What kinds of decisions do you have to make? And just drive those actions and then monitor that they're going successfully. Anyways, one of the things that I love to do with each of my guests is give all of the listeners an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us a little bit more about Christopher. It could be, background. I mean, obviously, I think you let the cat out of the bag that you like skiing, but like, what else do you like to do outside of work?
It's all about fishing and cycling, I think. So I have a
Yeah.
10-year-old. We do fishing Fridays. We drive to fishing tournaments. Like it's a lot of fun. I think if I was to do it again, I'd probably be a professional bass angler or
Yeah.
sort of for go after billfish and those pieces. But maybe when I transition from this, but it's all about outdoors and fishing. And I really like cycling. I think that's one of the few places where I can actually think,
Mm,
sort of, getting out on a trail and riding for some distance and those pieces. It's just nice to see and nice to relax a bit and get some exercise and then realize that you were deep in thought or have cycled well further out than you thought you were.
yeah.
Um, I may need to invest in one of those electric bikes at some point for that. When I get myself in that position when I'm out too far and didn't realize that getting home won't be as much of a struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. I also am I'm a cyclist. I totally get that. It's just you can kind of get out in that groove and just, get some space in between everything else and just like have some great time that's healthy and feels good and you're outdoors. It's great. I also love that. Um I guess I got to look into bass fishing. That sounds like a lot of fun.
I mean, it can be anything sort of, but
Yeah.
it's the same. It's different than cycling because you are, I like activities where I'm trying to either doing something very monotonous over a period of time. Like that's what cycling is, sort of
Yes.
that the background changes, but you're sort of, in a gear and just sort of pedaling along. Or
Yeah.
I like things where I need to figure something out. Like fishing is like that. Oh, we didn't catch anything. So I'm going to try a different bait. I'm going to try a different lure. There's things to change. I think
Yeah.
the other thing like that for me is sailing. Like I love that as well. I'm a sailing instructor, but I have not
Really?
instructed anyone yeah, I used to so in Boston community boating. So did that a lot, and then Boston Harbor Sailing Club. I used to do um they call it offshore, but I don't consider the Chesapeake Bay to be offshore,
Yeah.
but yeah, racing on the bay. And then when I was in Denver, I ran their first sort of kids youth sailing program. So did a lot of that. But it's the same thing. So you're out there relaxing in nature, but if you want to engage yourself, it's tuning the sails and, making all these micro adjustments to stay in the right spot of the wind. So I like that kind of stuff
Yeah.
where I'm
Yeah.
relaxing, but if I want to engage my mind in something, I sort of have that thing I can do it with.
Yeah. I love that. I'm in a similar boat. I have not sailed in many years, but I grew up sailing. I think it was just kind of a good excuse for my parents to get me out of the house in the summer. But
Yeah.
um I did take to it because it's, like you get to spend like great time outside and in nature, and anytime it gets too hot, you just hop out of the boat and then get back in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but it was a lot of fun. One of the things that I will say though is like, some of the sailboats that I was in, like particularly I sailed in 420s as I got a little bit older. And I did not find those relaxing. Like one little gust of wind, and
Yeah.
you're getting dumped in one of those things. So I think, now that I'm in my 30s, I'd probably, pick something that isn't going to flip over on me. Something a little more relaxing.
J24s,
Yeah,
they're a bit more comfortable in terms of from a sailing perspective. I did
yeah,
a lot of racing on J24s out in the bay. It was sort of the boat of choice, but you want to have someone else who owns it because you have to change your suit of sails every year, and it's 15 to 20. It's like a $15,000 to $20,000 investment just to change the sails out, and then you've got your racing ones, and then you have different size jibs and spinnakers, and if
yeah,
you're really sort of particularly serious.
yeah, yeah. It's I think boating and sailing in general are not inexpensive things.
Unless you buy an outboard motor or an electric and you go to your local reservoir and like that. My son and I do that, and that's particularly inexpensive.
Yeah,
It costs $25, $27 for the day. You can rent a John boat, and then I have an outboard, and we just, have a nice day out on the water.
yeah, I love it. Now, Christopher, what are the best ways for people to connect with you if they'd like to?
And I think LinkedIn is probably the best. So,
Mhm.
looking for Christopher Antonopoulos or at Find Your Yeti, sort of Instagram, Facebook, and the like. I think the other part is, so I know this is odd, and I'm probably going to get a lot more calls, but I mean, I'm happy for someone to call me directly. Um, I'll leave that for sort of the quote for this, but I'm happy for someone to, give me a call. I mean, I will obviously know, or if you're, you know, call me if you need help figuring something out. This is not a call for, we have a cleaning service for your office, or I've
Yeah.
got this great thing to offer you, or I thought XYZ, but I'll leave that, Ryan, with like a link to LinkedIn and my direct phone number if someone has a question or wants to figure something else. But, please know I've got this great AI solution that I think you should sell to your clients. It's probably best to go through Mike or Meg in the organization rather than me, because it will, um, probably never surface.
First off, thank you for kind of having invested the time into learning how to communicate that way. And then also
Yeah.
for taking some of your time today to share with me and the listeners some of your experience. It's been hugely beneficial. I learned a lot of things about how to, sell and market better. So thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome. I mean, I love these calls. It's sort of a way I talk through things as sort of as a way to figure out. So this is helpful to me. I think, yeah, just excited to be part of this, excited to help. I think, the way that we best help companies are with their technology and technology stack. So, what do you want to accomplish? What tools do you actually need? You actually need those 50 to 70 different solutions. And so our role is to sort of think about what you want to achieve and then help you solve the technology piece of it.
Yeah.
And so that's what sort of
Yeah.
drives us. And that's kind of where we can best help. And we have this internal for our culture is called intelligently approachable. And so that's something that we train everyone on, which is, we have some, experts in technology that are very technical in those pieces, but it doesn't matter if you're not approachable, and it doesn't matter if you make someone feel bad about not having that level of expertise. So that's the other really important piece is that, based on your audience, I'm sure it's very technical, like a lot of our teams, but just, take a moment to take a step back that people may not make the same connections between data or relationships between things that are particularly obvious to you. So, sort of take a step back, take a deep breath before you sort of communicate those things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. And actually speaking of the audience, I also want to make sure that I thank the audience today for listening. If you guys liked something that you heard, you laughed, you learned anything, please make sure to tell a friend, give us a repost or a like, a subscribe, give us a rating. Hopefully it's a good one. All of those kind of call to action things, if I can use some marketing lingo. Anyways, Christopher, thank you again so much. This has been awesome. I really appreciate your time. And this has been another exciting episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbetterdecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.